right, welcome back to the Fast Break. I am your host, Drew Amburgy. Today, my first guest on today is going to be Nick. How are we doing, Nick?
Doing good.
Good. All right, well, it was another great week in the NBA. You know, we're going into the All-Star break this weekend. That's always fun and exciting, even though sometimes the game can be a little bit boring. But, you know, with those new rules, it is a little bit more exciting. Last year was obviously very fun, so that'll be a good weekend that we can talk about next week. But for this week, I'm having Nick on to talk about the Clippers and the Warriors. Two interesting teams that have had very different seasons, but kind of coming together at the right time. Now, the Warriors are in the 2 seed, and the Clippers are in the 8 seed. The Clippers have obviously made quite a few moves in the last week or so with that trade deadline. Now, this game was a fun one, and honestly kind of had an unexpected outcome. So, Steph came out firing. You know, he was in his full bag of tricks. He was doing threes from, 3 feet behind the three-point line. The net wasn't even moving. Just full Steph on display for that first quarter and a half. They were up 10 on the Clippers going into the second quarter before the Clippers went on a 16-0 run that actually saw them take a slight lead into halftime. But the Clippers in the third quarter were unstoppable. This is when they got hot. In the third quarter, the Clippers opened up a 20-point lead, and basically from there in the fourth, it was kind of just back and forth, and then the Clippers ended up winning 119-104 over the Warriors. Now, the game was in L.A., so maybe that gave them a little home crowd boost, but it was a little bit surprising considering the Warriors had been playing pretty well recently. Now, for the Clippers, Terrence Mann led the way with 25 points, Reggie Jackson right behind him at 19. But like I said, the big story about that was Terrence Mann in the third quarter. He helped the Clippers outscore the Warriors 33-19 in the third quarter, and that basically was your game right there. Nick, what were your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, Steph for sure came out firing. At the half, he had 26 on 9 of 11 shooting. But I would say the big story for the Warriors in the second half was how Steph was he wasn't even there. He had 7 points in the whole second half, ending with 33. Once he went cold, the whole team just kind of followed with him and went ice. Clay had a poor shooting night on 3 for 14 from the field. Not a lot of depth, I would say, from the Warriors compared to the Clippers. The Clippers had all 5 of their starters scoring double figures, and the Warriors only had a few guys. Looney was all right. Jordan Poole had 13 off the bench. Kuminga, I think one of his first starts, I would say, had 10 points, and then Wiggins added 13. Besides Steph in the first half, there wasn't a lot of offense, and their defense was very poor in the second half. Terrence Mann, once he got the ball in his hands, kind of started facilitating the floor, just kind of took over for the Clips.
Yeah, Mann was awesome, and he was such a steal for them in the draft out of Kentucky. I think he had an injury going into the draft, and that's why he dropped a little bit. Can't say enough about the Clippers organization and front office being able to find those diamonds in the rough, especially with Terrence Mann. A lot of teams could use a Terrence Mann right now. And that just goes to one of the big things about the Clippers. What makes them exciting is they have so much depth. So they had all 5 starters scoring double figures. Like I said, Reggie Jackson 19, Zubac with 18, Batum with 14. And then you had Covington and Morris both with 11 points as well, too. So just passing the ball around, everybody getting a little bit of the share of the love. They didn't even have Norman Powell in this game, and he actually has a fractured left foot, so he's out indefinitely. That one's not going to be great for the Clippers, especially going into this playoff push where, if you looked at him a month ago, I was thinking, pack it up, let's go into next year. Not really too worried about him. After these moves, they've actually been really competitive. They play hard. They have a really good coach in Tyronn Lue, and right now they're sitting at the 8 seed. You got the Lakers and Blazers right behind them. I don't see them making too much of a push to take their spot away. You got the Pelicans, who are playing really well, but they're a full 5 games back. So I don't know if they're going to be able to catch them by the end of the year. And they're only 2 games behind the Timberwolves, who are playing well, but I'm never really going to trust Minnesota too much. They got to prove it to me for me to be worried about them kind of staying ahead of the Clippers right now. So the Clippers are looking to be in the play-in game. I'm assuming that they're going to be in that 7-8 seed. I don't necessarily see them catching Denver or Dallas in that 6 or 5 seed. So let me ask you this, Nick. Do you see them making a real push and getting out of the play-in game, or do you see them staying in that 7 to 8 range going into the playoffs, into the play-in?
I think to kind of get that 6th seed. I think it's going to be a little bit of a stretch. I don't really see it happening. I can see them playing in the play-in game. And from what I saw last night, I will say that I would think that they come out of the play-in game and be in the first round. Don't know how far they get in the first round. Just, with Kawhi's probably out still. PG's still out. So, I mean, 2 of the best players in the league that you have aren't playing. So I don't think they'd make a real push in the playoffs. But I think they could try and I think they'll win their play-in game and be able to most likely be a first-round exit.
Yeah. So it's really important for them to make sure they stay in that 7 or 8 seed, because then you just got to win one game at home and you're in. So I don't think if they had to play the Lakers, the Blazers, Pelicans, I don't know if those teams would be able to give them too much of an issue. Now, the Pelicans definitely could if they had Zion, but that's a big if. And, of course, with everything in this, everything goes out the window if Kawhi or Paul George comes back. Then you got to completely reassess their chances.
Exactly.
I do think they will make the playoffs as either the 7 or the 8 seed. And if they did have to play, if they had to rematch against the Warriors, of course I think the Warriors would win in a 7-game series. But I would say that I think the Clippers get 1. I don't know if they get 2, but I think they would at least win 1 game. And they'd make those games difficult because they do play really hard and they play good defense. So I could see them giving a few fits in the first round. They're a feisty team. I like the Clippers, and I like the way they play. That's part of the reason why they got Paul George and Kawhi in the first place. They made that little run, what was it, three years back, and then they saw, okay, there's some pieces here. They're so deep after all the moves that they've made. So I think when Paul George and Kawhi do come back next year, with all this depth they have, if they're able to keep most of these guys or all of them, I think they could actually be a real threat going into next year. But let's talk about a team that's got a shot this year, the Warriors. So Curry, like you said, great first half, 33 points. Clay, rough, 3 of 14, only shot 21% from the field last night. They're 2 games up on Memphis. Now they're not playing bad. They're still 7-3 in their last 10 games, but you got to be careful because Memphis is playing awesome as well too, and you don't want to fall into that 3 seed. Because if you fall into that 3 seed, you're not playing the Clippers, Lakers, Blazers, Pelicans. You're playing Denver or Dallas. And that's a much tougher opponent just because of the stars on those teams, Jokic for Denver, and then also Luka for Dallas. That's just going to be a much tougher series. And you kind of want to coast through the first series if you're the number 2 seed. Do you think the Warriors will continue to stay at the number 2 seed right now?
I think we could see a little fluctuation. I have a feeling that maybe Memphis will jump up there for a little bit, but I just think Golden State getting all their pieces back. I mean, Clay hasn't been back for that long. Steph's having an amazing year, like he always is, best shooter in the league. Wiseman, update today, James Wiseman was able to do a 5-on-5 scrimmage, so he's finally getting back into the swing of things. And then once you add Draymond Green back, I know a lot of people don't like Draymond Green, but he's a really complete player on offensive and defensive end. So I think once they add those pieces, I could see him dropping to the 3 for a little bit, but once you add Wiseman and Green back, I think they'll jump back up to the 2. And then hopefully, in their case, make a push against Phoenix to try and take that 1 spot.
For sure. Yeah, you can't really necessarily base how much Draymond actually means to that team. I mean, he's really the glue that kind of holds them all together. Yeah. He's the defensive enforcer. He sets the tone for that team. So even though obviously we all know he's not a big-time scorer, he's a defensive player, but he can put the ball in the bucket every once in a while.
Good facilitator as well.
A great passer as well too. So yeah, obviously without Draymond, without Wiseman, those 2 probably make a difference in this game and going forward. But I think you're right. I think it's going to be really close. I could see some fluctuation. I could see him going back and forth with less than 30 games to go in the season. I could see Memphis jumping them and then the Warriors making a push at the end. So I'm not too worried about them right now. I do think when it's all said and done, they will still be in that number 2 seed just because Clay's not going to have bad games like this all the time.
3 for 14 is unheard of.
That's tough. And it was surprising because he was playing really well going into this game. He had his best game of the season with 33 against the Lakers, sometime last week. And so I really thought he was, making the strides to be more consistent. So this was a tough one for our boy Clay. We always love Clay. Go Clay. But, Yeah, I don't see them dropping too many games like this, having kind of duds like they did last night. So I am not too worried about the Warriors. I think they'll keep that number 2 seed. And I think it's important to them. I mean, as a veteran team, they know how important it is to keep that number 2 seed. Because if they played one of the teams from the play-in, I think they sweep them. Maybe, like I said, the Clippers get 1 game or something like that. If they had to play Denver, I could see Denver easily getting 2 games.
I could see that going to 6 or 7.
I could see that going to 6 or 7 as well.
Jokic is just, I think, too dangerous. Like, he's a 7-foot center, but he plays like a guard, passes like a guard, shoots like a guard, rebounds like a center. But I think Jokic is just too dangerous.
Possible MVP.
Yeah, again. So
at least going to be in the top 3 there for Denver. And you never know if they miraculously get Murray back. Aaron Gordon's playing well. You know, they just got weapons. So you definitely don't want to drop to that 3 seed. I feel bad for Memphis if they do have to stay in that 3 seed because that's a tough matchup in that first round. But yeah, so that was Clippers Warriors. Clippers 119, Warriors 104 in a surprising outcome. Thanks for coming on, Nick. It was fun talking to you.
Thank you.
All righty. Stay tuned. We're going to have another guest on right after the break. All right, welcome back. I am now joined by Danny. How are we doing, Danny?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me, Drew.
Good. Thanks for coming on. So Danny's going to talk to me about a couple of teams who have made some trades in the last week or so and shooken up their roster. We're going to be talking Kings Nets. Now, they played last night, Monday, because we're recording this on Tuesday. And we saw the Nets started strong. Kings made a little bit of a run in the second quarter, got it down to like 4 or 5 points there. And then, of course, as we all thought, the Nets actually ran away with it, and they ended up winning 109-85. Now, I thought this was going to be actually a little bit closer because the Nets didn't have Kyrie, they didn't have KD, and Simmons hadn't started playing yet. So I was like, oh, this is going to probably be a pretty good matchup. Nope, I was wrong. The Kings still suck. But let's start off with talking about, obviously, the more interesting team, the Nets. Now, Seth Curry, who had just gotten traded to the Nets, part of that Ben Simmons, James Harden trade, he had a phenomenal debut for the Nets. He finished with 23 points and 7 rebounds, kind of a above-average rebounding game for Mr. Seth Curry there. Drummond, also who was part of the trade as well, coming from Philadelphia to Brooklyn. He had 11 points, 9 rebounds, not a bad stat line for the big man. He is always a good rebounder, so you get a lot of rebounding when he comes to the team. And then, of course, good old LaMarcus Aldridge with dropping in 19 points as well, too. What did you think about the Nets and their new additions to the team? Because I thought the Curry-Drummond pick and roll looked really good last night.
Yeah, I agree. The Nets look much crisper than the team that had plummeted from like the top of the Eastern standings.
Looks like they just got a shot in the arm.
They really did. Yeah, it looked like a boost of instant offense. Seth Curry, an unsung hero, I think, in that transaction. He really provides instant offense on the perimeter in the absence of Kyrie and Simmons. And like you said, the pick and roll game between Curry and Drummond was looking extra strong. And what Drummond brings to the table too is absolutely awesome. I mean, the Nets already have a pretty strong post core. I mean, they got LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin, Claxton, now Drummond, KD. They're a very big and strong team, and I think that's going to be huge, especially with some of these Eastern Conference teams like the Bucks. And so having that big core, it takes pressure off from the perimeter, and so the shooters like Curry and KD are going to be able to get open a little bit more and have more freedom to move with. But then anything they miss, everyone's crashing the boards. I thought Bruce Brown, too, had an insanely efficient game.
Bruce Brown played awesome last night.
That was crazy. A game high plus 28 in the game efficiency plus minus stat column. 19 points, 3 blocks, 5 steals, 6 assists, 6 rebounds, 1 from deep, and 0 turnovers, shooting 67% from the field.
Yeah.
It was a pretty impressive performance. I mean, especially 5 steals, 3 blocks. I mean, these are stats that they're bigger than what they show on paper. And having a guy like that that's willing to do the dirty work like he was, invaluable for a team like the Nets.
Yeah, and when you got all these superstars all around you, not only is it hard to play a team that's loaded with superstars, but when you got a guy like Bruce Brown running around, making steals, just making the hustle plays, that makes it just even harder. Because not only are they just better than you, now they're out hustling you. Like the guys, the eighth guy off the bench and stuff like that. Now, obviously, last night he was not the eighth guy off the bench, but, with all the stars out and stuff like that. But, yeah, Bruce Brown had an awesome game. When I was watching, I swear I was hearing his name called by the announcers like every other possession for them. So, yeah, Bruce Brown was playing awesome. He's been a good player for them all year and last year as well, too. He kind of emerged at the end of last year going into the playoffs. So, yeah, it just goes to show that the Nets now have a lot more depth. I think, getting Curry and Drummond and now having Bruce Brown, and they're waiting on Joe Harris to come back. They're just going to have a lot more depth for this final stretch run going into the playoffs.
And we had mentioned it earlier, but I mean, this is basically the Nets bench that was playing this game, and they looked phenomenal. They looked sharp, and I think games like this one, where it's mostly the bench kind of carrying the whole performance of the game, I mean, that's going to be huge, and that's going to provide them experience going into the postseason. They're going to be more comfortable playing in situations like this, and like once Joe Harris comes back in the picture, I mean, this is going to be a very scary team in the East once all the pieces come back.
One of the interesting things, too, is that, I mean, LaMarcus Aldridge probably will be in the starting lineup, so they at least did have one starter, I suppose. Blake Griffin as well, too. And I could see Curry being part of their closing lineup in the playoffs because Joe Harris has honestly not shot the ball fantastic this season. Curry, if he plays the way he was last night, I could definitely see him kind of flip-flopping with Joe Harris because honestly, he's been playing really well for them all season. Oh, gosh. Sorry about that. The Nets, they're smoking hot. I'm getting smoked out of here. But, no, I could see Curry being in the closing lineup for the Nets as well, too. So, after this trade, I am on the record saying that I think the Nets actually won the James Harden-Ben Simmons trade because of what they got back with Curry and Drummond. Drummond's rebounding and Curry's shooting gives them some depth that they just didn't have before. So I actually think they won that trade. And, I mean, just imagine when Simmons comes back and he's not going to have to be burdened with anything he doesn't want to do. Because Simmons is far enough into his career that we know now he's not going to do anything he doesn't want to do. He doesn't necessarily want to work on his game and add elements to it. He knows what he's good at: defense, passing, driving to the basket. And you know what? That's all he's going to have to do. And when he's driving to the basket and getting all this attention, now he just has to kick out to Curry, Kyrie, KD. I mean, those guys are going to get open shots. And those are guys you do not want getting open shots. I mean, you got some 40% three-point shooters scattered all around the team. So I think they're going to be dangerous. I think that the addition of Simmons, when he does get into this lineup, is just going to make this offense click. If he accepts his role, that's the big thing for them. Is Simmons needs to accept his role on this team, which is basically kind of like a Draymond Green, honestly. Play good defense, pass. You don't even have to score. He doesn't have to score if he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
You got four great scorers around you. So he's going to be able to limit himself to what he wants to do and what he's good at. And that's why I think that this Nets trade just worked out great for them. They got more depth, they got more picks, and honestly, they got a little bit younger. One of the things I was saying about the Nets is honestly, this makes their championship window a little bit longer. Harden, still a great player, on the wrong side of 30.
Yeah.
Ben Simmons is much younger. And honestly, with Simmons, the picks, Cam Thomas, I just think this gives them a longer championship window, which I also like for them in the trade. Ben Simmons started practicing today, so I assume we're going to see him fairly quickly after the All-Star break next week. So that'll be interesting, and I'll definitely be excited to watch them when they have all their pieces together. Their pick and roll with Curry and Andre was great, like you said. And so just a great first performance from two of the three guys that the Nets picked up in the trade. So they've got to be very excited. Let's pass it on to the Kings. So Sabonis, in his debut with Sacramento, finished with 9 points and 9 rebounds. Not great, but it's first game with the Kings, so you can't really judge him too much on that one. Obviously, Sabonis is a very good player. He's an all-star caliber player. I expect him to be dropping 25, 10, and 7 pretty soon. So rough one for him though, because anytime you make a trade, especially of the questionable caliber that the Kings did, you really want him to go out and play well.
Yeah.
Especially with Tyrese Halliburton dropping 30 the other night. So that was a tough one for the Kings. Check in on your Sacramento friends. De'Aaron Fox, good game, 26 points. DiVincenzo, who also was acquired by the Kings in a different trade, with 12 points and 8 rebounds, so solid role play from him. But like I said, rough start for the Sabonis era. I do think it'll get better, so don't worry too much. Now the Kings, in the move that they made, in the trades they made, clearly they want to win now, which was surprising because they were young and had some promising players. They got rid of Hield, they got rid of Halliburton. Got Sabonis back, who's a little bit older. He's not that old yet. I was surprised to find out how actually young he is. So not terrible on that one. And Sabonis is a more complete player right now. So they obviously are in a win-now mode because they've been bad for so long. I guess they're just trying to fill some seats, I suppose. That's the only thing I can see. And they thought Sabonis gave them a much better chance to win now, even though Halliburton was a fan favorite. They're probably gonna be in the near the play-in. I think they're going to win more games with Sabonis. He does make them better right now. What do you think for the Nets? Or what do you think for the Kings? Do you think they're going to make the play-in tournament, especially with a couple of teams ahead of them possibly tanking? I don't. Where do you think they finish in the West?
Yeah. To me, the Kings still look half a step slow. I mean, you said they're in a win-now mode. I don't think that this trade really worked out that way for them. I mean, Sabonis does improve the fluidity of their offense. Having he's almost 7 foot, but a guy that can move like he does at 7 foot, distribute the ball, score from deep. It does complement their offense. But giving up Hield and Halliburton, the Kings got older and they look slower.
Yeah.
De'Aaron Fox to me looked like the only competent point guard out there, he had a game-high 26, but, I mean, if you're just like – but no one else was helping on the team.
Somebody has to score, right?
Yeah, he's putting up 26, but, I mean, if he's missing a lot of his shots and guys aren't getting rebounds and, I mean, they got dominated by the Nets, and I don't think this trade worked out well for them. I mean, they're ranked 13th, 25.5 games back right now. I think that they're going to probably finish somewhere around there, and I don't think there's any hopes for them snagging a playoff spot in the West this year.
Yeah, I mean, that 10th seed isn't too far off. That's all they got to do to get to the play-in game. But, I mean, what's the point of making the play-in game? I mean, yeah, it gives your fans like a glimmer of hope, but it's not really actually making the playoffs. Because I think if they had to play the Clippers, who possibly could get the 7th seed, I think they lose that game at home or on the road. I think they lose that game. And then, so they did all this for like a 1-game play-in game. Like, I just don't see the vision there for the franchise. So that's a tough one for me, and I don't see them. The only other thing I could think is that maybe having Sabonis, who is a proven star. I think Sabonis is a really, really good player. Mm-hmm. Maybe it attracts somebody else in the free agency market. They're never going to get a star, but maybe you can, if they really think Sabonis can be a superstar, maybe it attracts somebody who wants, because they're going to be able to spend as much money as they want. You know, like they have to overpay people to get to Sacramento. So I guess maybe what they're thinking is that it's a good enough option if they have Sabonis and maybe a couple other pieces with Fox and DiVincenzo, if Fox continues to get better, to where maybe there's a free agent in like the top 30 to 40 players in the league that wants to go there, and maybe at some point in the next couple of years they make an 8 seed, 7 seed in the West and get swept by the Warriors in the first round. So I don't know. That's a tough one for the Kings. Just brutal that's how the kind of Sabonis era started for them. But, Nets 109, Kings 85. So there you go. Nets get a brutally needed win. I mean, they were on a 10-game losing streak. So
11 game.
Yeah, 11 games.
11
Sorry
game
about that.
losing
Yeah,
streak.
my bad. 11-game losing streak for the Nets. So at least they break that and maybe give them a little bit of momentum going into the All-Star break when they hopefully get their stars back not too long. But all right, Nets 109, Kings 85. Thank you for coming on, Danny. It was fun.
fun.
All
Had a
righty,
good
stay
time.
tuned. We're going to have another guest for you right after the break. All right, welcome back. I am now joined by Austin. How we doing, man?
Doing great, man. Ready to talk some Bulls and Spurs.
Cool. Yeah, we had a nice matchup of Chicago and San Antonio last evening. And it was one that was pretty close for a while. You know, the Bulls were hanging in there, or the Spurs were hanging in there. You know, it was a pretty close game. But then in the fourth quarter, I mean, it was DeRozan time. Now, the Bulls and DeRozan outscored the Spurs 37-20 in the fourth quarter. And that was the difference in the game because it was really close before that. And then the Bulls ended up pulling it out 120-109. So, like I said, basically that fourth quarter was the difference in the game there. They were unstoppable. DeRozan was fully in his bag in MVP form. He finished the game with 40 points and 7 assists. Vucevic dropped in another 25 and 16 rebounds, so you gotta love him on the boards. And then Kobe White having a great game since Zach LaVine was out, so he stepped up and he's dropped in 24 points for him as well. He's a great young player as well for them. Now on the Spurs, you know, you had DeJounte Murray, but they had a lot of moving pieces, so I guess they're still trying to figure out exactly what they're trying to do here. But for the Bulls, now, like I said, DeRozan was in MVP form. Of course, you got Giannis, you got Jokic, you got Embiid, all the bigs. But, I mean, for me, DeRozan's got to be top 5 and at least 4th in the MVP conversation because over his last 6 games, he has had over 35 points and not shot under 50% from the field, which is the first time that has ever been done in a 6-game stretch in Bulls history.
Crazy.
That's right. Michael Jordan never did it. Scottie Pippen never did it. Derrick Rose never did it. So that's that. Like he's breaking Bulls records, which are probably some of the hardest records to break, unless you're like in the Lakers organization. But yeah, so just a really insane performance by him. What did you think about the game and DeRozan as well too?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So that game, solid game back and forth, like you said, for the first 3 quarters. I mean, the Spurs played really good basketball. They, played typical Spurs ball, moving the ball around, 28 assists on the night, really solid for them. But then the Bulls really just took over, like you said, 37-20 in the fourth quarter. A lot of that was led by DeRozan. And, I mean, yeah, looking at him in the MVP conversation, I don't know how you can have him out of the top 5.
Yeah.
I mean, I currently looked, and they've got Chris Paul in the top 5 right now, which I understand, he's the leader of the number 1 team in the West, but I don't know if he does nearly as much for his team as DeRozan does for his team. I mean, the Bulls are right now a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference, which I don't know, man. It's tough to put Chris Paul ahead of DeRozan right now in my mind.
I agree. I don't think Chris Paul should be ahead of DeRozan, especially just with the way DeRozan's been playing in the fourth quarter, in crunch time,
Absolutely.
when the stars need to shine. I mean, we saw him hit 2 back-to-back buzzer beaters in consecutive days, which I think was possibly the first time that it happened, like back-to-back days in a back-to-back. So, back-to-back. So DeRozan has been playing unbelievable, and I think he should be rewarded and definitely should be ahead of Chris Paul. Love Chris Paul. What he does for the Suns cannot be underrated. He changed around that whole franchise's trajectory.
Definitely.
But so did DeRozan. I mean, the Bulls weren't that good last year.
No.
They're really good this year. I have a feeling they are going to make at least it into the second round, if not the conference finals this year, which the Bulls haven't been to since, our buddy, what's his name? Derrick Rose. I'm good. I drew a blank there since Derrick Rose was on the Bulls. So, yeah, what DeRozan is doing is awesome, and I think he should easily be ahead of Chris Paul. love Chris Paul, but it's also a statistics-driven award.
Definitely.
You know,
Definitely.
And he's dropping 30 pieces, 40 pieces every other night. So I think you got to give it to him right now. Not the whole award, but you got to give him the nod ahead of just most other wing players, point guards, anybody that's not a center currently right now.
Absolutely. You got to give him a little bit of credit.
Another big talking point for the Bulls, LaVine. He is now seeing a specialist for his knee going into All-Star weekend. He has now missed 2 games. Starting to be a little bit of a concern because he's part of the, that 3-4-headed monster the Bulls have coming at you because they don't have, the way DeRozan's playing right now, they do have a superstar, but we've seen him fall apart in the playoffs. It was called LeBronto for a reason.
Right.
So, we have seen DeRozan fall apart in the playoffs. So they do need LaVine to make any kind of run in the playoffs. Are you concerned about LaVine's knee and what this might mean for their seeding going into the playoffs if he has to miss extended amount of time?
Yeah, I'm definitely concerned, but I feel like there's 2 sides to this issue. And the first one, the positive side of this, is this injury couldn't have happened at a better time, which is weird to think about because, we're kind of coming down the stretch of the season. But we're, like, a few days away from the All-Star break, which is good timing for LaVine. He's an All-Star this year. He's definitely not going to play in the game, I would assume.
He shouldn't.
He shouldn't if he's dealing with these injuries.
Zach, don't.
But, yeah, he's got some time. He's got maybe, 10 days-ish from now till when they're back in action again. So he's got some time to hopefully rest up and, look after that knee injury. But at the same time, he's dealing with the left knee problems, and it's the exact same knee that he tore his ACL back in 2017. And that was LaVine's biggest issue for, coming out of college as well, is, can he stay healthy and can he be that explosive player that he's shown us all he can be all the time?
Yeah, had some issues at UCLA. Good point. I think you're right. I think you got to milk this one. You do not want to mess around with
Definitely
it. Not a knee that you've already had torn ligaments in. I think they got to make sure he's 110% recovered before they do anything with him back on the court.
Absolutely.
I think you're just having such a good season. I just wouldn't risk it right now. If you fall down in the playoffs, I don't know, how much does it really matter?
Right.
Because honestly, you're gonna have to play a tough team no matter what going into the playoffs.
Yeah.
You might have the Nets in the 7th seed. So if you get the 2 seed, what's really the point of that? So there's gonna be so much jockeying for position.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be maybe 1 or 2 teams that you would actually want to play in the first round.
Yeah, exactly.
You might have the Bucks and you might have the Bucks and Bulls in the 4-5 matchup. It's going to be a bloodbath. There's going to be a really good team that doesn't make it out of the first round in the playoffs in the East. So that's going to be interesting. So I don't even getting now if you're going to be the 1 or 2 seed, I think that's important because at least the very bottom teams might, be easier to beat. But look, if the Nets don't pull it together, they might be a 7 seed. We don't know. So I would err on the side of caution and just have him sit out until he is perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the Spurs as well too. With the loss, they are now 12th in the West, not going in the right direction. They made a lot of changes in the last week. So they traded Derek White to the Celtics. That was basically, as a Celtics fan, I love it. He's a great fit. A dog on defense. And they're honestly gonna miss him. But it honestly just didn't work out with him and DeJounte. They honestly played the same position. It just really didn't work. They both good players, but just kind of a weird fit. I think that's, it was tough playing them in the same closing lineup together. So I think they had to pick one, and obviously it's DeJounte. He's turning into one of the better point guards in the league. He's having an awesome season, almost averaging a triple-double.
Yeah.
And, still young, just hit his first All-Star game. And so congratulations to him, a guy from Washington. We love to see it. And they bought out Dragic, but I don't think they're going to actually keep him, so we'll see about that one from Toronto. In the trade with Boston, they got Josh Richardson, who I like. He was having a really good season for us, plays good defense, was actually shooting the ball as good as he was when he was back in Miami, who was actually that was his best season. And then Romeo Langford as well, too, from the Celtics, who most people listening to this probably have never watched Romeo Langford play. That's because he wasn't getting a lot of minutes on the Celtics because he played the same position as some of our stars. So he's going to get to go down to San Antonio. Romeo Langford is a very athletic player, and he's kind of a confidence rhythm guy. I think Popovich is actually going to get a lot more out of him than the Celtics were able to. He kind of feels like a Popovich guy that he can kind of mold. He's got the athleticism. He honestly needs to play in the Spurs system. I think that's actually a good pickup for them, and they got a first-round pick out of it as well, too. So, obviously, this was a move for the Spurs where they obviously realize they're smart. They're a smart organization. They realize we're not competing for anything this year.
Yeah.
So, moving forward, you obviously have DeJounte at the point. You know, you got Josh Richardson and Langford if you want to keep them. If not, they could be an asset. You got some more picks down the road. You got Vassell, who I think is a good young player as well, too. And then Keldon Johnson is actually having a pretty good season as well. So they got a couple of promising players, a good amount of picks. So I obviously recognize the way they're going with the organization, which I think is the correct one. You got to play the long game here. You just had your best player who's young make his first All-Star team, going to build around him. You're still, for being a small market team, San Antonio actually is a decent free agent destination because you got Popovich, you know? So what do you see for the Spurs' future, and what do you think about the moves that they made?
Yeah, man, I really like the way they set up themselves for the future here. You know, they were smart, as you said, you know, kind of trade away Derek White because the fit wasn't there, and they also traded away a couple other veterans that they had in Thad Young, who wasn't really playing many minutes, but, you know, could be impactful somewhere else.
I like Thaddeus Young.
Yeah,
but
me too.
He just wasn't getting minutes there because they were trying to play the young guys. Yeah,
absolutely. And, you know, they bring in guys. I really like Romeo Langford coming in there because I think, you know, he's going to be able to get a ton of minutes, hopefully, you know, playing on the wing. Obviously, like you said, Popovich, great developer. The Spurs organization, great at developing young players. And, you know, they also bring in a couple of protected first-round picks at this deadline, which is really solid for them. You know, obviously, like you said, they're going rebuild mode. And, I mean, this summer, they're honestly set up pretty well to start their rebuild. I mean, they've kind of been rebuilding for the past, you know, year or two now.
Weird transition period.
Yeah, because they still, you know, had DeRozan, and that was...
Once they got rid of DeRozan, that kind of signaled, like, we need to get rid of the veteran players who are keeping us in that middle range, which you never want to be.
Don't want to be there.
You either want to be bad or you want to be good, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it looks like right now they're looking at maybe 3 first-round picks this year, which, I mean, this draft isn't necessarily loaded, but, you know, their pick right now is projected at 7. That could go, you know, up or down, obviously, depending on how they finish out the year and how the ping pong balls bounce.
Yeah, well, with the trade nowadays, having the 7th best odds, you know, you could still end up with this 3rd pick in the draft, which is how crazy random it is now.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think they're set up really well. And then, like you said, you know, maybe you get some luck in the lottery, get one of those top 3 guys, and then not too bad of a, you know, free agency destination. Maybe could draw in a veteran or 2 and could turn things around within, you know, just a couple of years.
Yeah, and honestly, with the Spurs, picks mean a little bit more because when you have that good of a front office and guys' eye for talent, I mean, they got Kawhi, you know, who was looked over by many teams.
Yeah.
You know, they've continuously drafted well. Now they haven't necessarily been hitting on stars the last couple of years, but DeJounte Murray wasn't that necessarily high of a pick. No. You know, they have a good eye for it. So honestly, for them, picks mean more than they do for other teams.
Definitely.
You know, I mean, if you're the Knicks, 3 first-round picks might not even be that exciting. If you're the Spurs, three first-round picks kind of gets you excited. So, especially if they do want to move up, if they land in the 5 to 10 range, which they probably will, you know, they have a couple of assets. If a team ahead of them wants, you know, I'm not sure exactly how the draft is going to fold out, of course, but if they do want to make some moves and trade up now that they have 3 first-round picks, maybe they trade up a couple of spots because they see somebody at 5 who they think should be the number 1 pick in the draft, then those picks end up turning a lot more valuable. I think the Spurs, I trust them as an organization to make the right pick. And if there is a really good player available in the 7 to 10 to whatever range, they're going to find him. They're going to find him. They're not going to let him pass. I mean, there's not too many examples of the Spurs just making terrible picks. They actually have had a couple the last few years, but I don't expect that trend to continue on much longer. But yeah, so this was a good game. Obviously we probably figured that the Bulls were going to beat the Spurs. I just wanted to talk about both these teams because they're kind of heading in two completely different directions.
Definitely.
The Bulls are kind of honestly what the Spurs want to be in about a year or two.
Yeah.
So they're kind of two teams that kind of mirror themselves from different time ranges, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
cool. Alrighty, thank you so much for coming on, my man. It was fun talking to you.
Of course.
Alrighty, this was this was the latest episode of the Fast Break. Make sure to subscribe to all Cable 8 shows and our channel, and stay tuned for next week's episode. Alrighty, have a good night.
Have a good one.
Move so slowly, it's wide out.